We are leaving behind, hopefully, the boring stuff this week. We had to start off this class by introducing y'all to the fundamentals of critical thinking, defining it, talking about what it's good for, introducing you to arguments and their properties, validity, soundness. Then we looked at fallacies. We contrasted rational argumentation, or logos, with other forms of rhetoric, like ethos and pathos, other manipulative techniques. But today we're beginning our first case study. Whenever I teach critical thinking, I like organizing it in this way, not only because it gives students an introduction to seminal texts in the history of philosophy, but also because I think it's a lot more interesting. I mean, do you all really want to sit around and do symbolic logic and truth trees and things like that? Probably not, although some of you may. It's pretty mathematical. If you're mathematically minded, you might like it. But we're starting off with one of the most influential thinkers of Western history. Someone to whom we owe so much of how we think about things today, how ideas have developed through time. We're looking at Plato. We'll be taking a look at 3 of his dialogues this week. I would like to spend a lot more time on him, but honestly, we could take a whole class just on one of these dialogues. That is how rich they are and how important they are. Albert North Whitehead, 20th century philosopher, once said, "All of Western philosophy is just footnotes to Plato and Aristotle." That is why we're looking at him today. It is hard to understate how influential this guy has been and how important he is for our society still today. Now, the interesting thing about Plato is that he didn't write the way we write philosophy articles today, or scientific articles, right? This is how academia continues to turn. Researchers, people in the academy, professors, they'll do research, they'll painstakingly write an article, and then that article will pass through peer review, and it will be among their peers, and it will contribute to the research of the field. Well, Plato wrote in a much more literary fashion. He did his philosophy, or at least it's handed down to us, as dialogues between different characters, often featuring his mentor, whom, as you know, was forced to commit suicide, Socrates. Socrates often leads a lot of these dialogues, asking people their views about things, asking them to provide arguments and justifications for those views. But the interesting thing about the Platonic dialogues is that they often end in what we call aporia. And the dialogue we're looking at today is no different. Socrates and this other character, Euthyphro, are duking it out with arguments in a discussion, but we're not left with many clear and definitive answers. In a way, that's kind of disappointing. Why don't you just tell us how things are, Plato? Make us all easier for us. But it provides us with an opportunity to actually talk and think about this stuff. Another cool thing about the Platonic dialogues is that they aren't just rational argumentation. Because Plato wrote in this literary way, it's filled not only with arguments and reasoning, but also literary devices, symbolism, myth, poetry. And when you're reading the dialogues this week, I hope that you'll try to pay attention to that. Why does Plato use these images? What is he trying to conjure in us with these metaphors, with these devices? It may not always be easy to follow, but I can attest that if you take this stuff seriously, it will change the way that you look at the world, which is why we're looking at it in this class. Now, a little bit more about Plato's mentor, Socrates, who often appears as a character in these dialogues. You already know the story of Socrates, but you don't know his complete story. In these dialogues, Socrates is portrayed as being on a particular mission. He cares a lot about wisdom and virtue, okay? About becoming wiser himself, becoming a better person, figuring out how the world works. But so much of his motivation rides on this oracle at Delphi. Now, the ancient Greeks were a polytheistic society. Their education for a long time had been steeped in the stories and the poems of Homer. And one of the cultural practices that they had were, well, at various places around this region, there were temples that were dedicated to these gods. They worshipped many different gods. Well, like every other religion, occasionally they thought that the gods gave them messages, that the gods spoke to them and gave them guidance. In other words, they were given oracles. Now, according to the story, one of Socrates' friends went to this priestess at a temple at Delphi, and he asked, "Who's the wisest person in Athens, this Greek city-state that we're living in?" And the oracle was delivered through the priestess, and it said something very strange. It said, "No one in Athens is wiser than Socrates." When Socrates' friend told him this, he was very confused. If somebody came to you and said, "Yeah, the gods have said nobody's wiser than you," what would you think? How would you feel? Would you be like, "Yeah, obviously, I'm the smartest person around"? No, right? There's all so much that we don't know. Well, Socrates had a similar reaction. He thought, what does this mean? How could this make sense at all? I don't know much. I'm just this old guy who's been trying to, live my life in Athens. What's going on here? So he took it upon himself, because he didn't think that the gods could be wrong, that this message was incorrect. He took it upon himself to try to figure it out. What could this mean? No one in Athens is wiser than I am. How did he do that? Well, he sought out to prove the message wrong. He would walk around Athens, conversing with a bunch of people, asking them their views on things, asking them why they thought those things. And time again, he was disappointed. Why? Well, because he slowly came to realize that people had views about everything. What is justice? What makes an action right or wrong? How should we organize the city? And when he really questioned these people who claimed to know this kind of stuff, he found out that they really didn't know what they were talking about. And so the story goes, through his conversations with others, through his questioning, slowly perhaps he began to realize that maybe the message was correct in the sense that while nobody else really knew more than he did, at least he knew that he lacked knowledge and wisdom. He had some epistemic humility. This mission is basically what Socrates is engaged in all the dialogues we're going to read this week. But we're starting off with one that has been really influential for Christianity in the Western world, theology, arguments about God. We're starting with the Euthyphro, which is named after Socrates' interlocutor in this dialogue. In this piece, Socrates is trying to get to the bottom of what piety is. In other words, of morality. What makes an action good or bad? And how do we know that? What he's after in speaking to Euthyphro is some sort of objective standard of right and wrong. He's engaging in some conceptual analysis here. He's trying to figure out, well, we all claim to know more or less what's right and wrong. Do we really know that? What is that? Where does that objective standard come from? How do we explain not only our own behavior, but our own views about what makes an action moral or immoral? Now, what's particularly important about this dialogue is it has given us, in Western society, a dilemma that has stuck around for a very long time. And trying to work out this objective standard of right and wrong, we're given the Euthyphro Dilemma. This dilemma shows up in the dialogue, and it asks of us, is an action good because the gods love it? Or do the gods love good actions because they're good in and of themselves? As we'll see, answering this question either way leads to some problems. It leads to some contradictions. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we're left with at the end of this dialogue. Socrates and Euthyphro don't come away with a definitive answer, with a definitive explanation for what makes an action right or wrong. So pay attention as we go through class today. Participate, because this may be something you'll have to write on for your writing assignment on Friday. Okay? Particularly this dilemma, perhaps responses to it, what you think about it. Okay, is all of that making sense? Following along? Okay, good. Let me just give you a brief overview then of the dialogue. The dialogue begins with Socrates going on his way to address charges of impiety and corrupting of the youth that have been brought against him. You remember this from my little introduction to Plato earlier in the class, but as you know, charges were brought against Socrates. He was brought into court. The jury found him guilty of these crimes, and so he was sentenced to death. Well, this dialogue takes place before his death, presumably. That's where it's set. He's here to address these charges. Well, on his way to that place to figure out, why are these charges brought against me? What can I do about this? He runs into Euthyphro, this guy. And what has Euthyphro just done? Well, the reason why he runs into Euthyphro is because Euthyphro has just brought charges against his own father. We'll get the explanation here in a little bit, but his father killed a servant in their household who himself killed another guy, so he was killing a murderer. Euthyphro thought what his father did was a bad thing, and so he testified in court against him. This would have been a really scandalous thing in Greek society. The Greeks had slaves. They supported this kind of institution. And so, firstly, generally, if you owned a slave, you could do whatever you wanted with the slave, right? So it wouldn't have been crazy or weird for somebody to kill their slave if they did something really, really bad. That would not be abnormal. What would be abnormal is, a son, for example, bringing charges against his own father and de-seating him as the head of the household. In some sense, this would be seen as immoral, as impious, as something that goes against the kind of lives that the gods want us to lead. Okay? And so, in a kind of symbolic fashion, we can say what Euthyphro might be engaging in here is kind of like a form of patricide, of killing one's own father. And this is a theme that runs intensely through the dialogue. Different Greek myths are brought up about instances in which the gods or somebody else kill their father. So this is something that we're going to be paying attention to today. What Socrates finds really puzzling about all this, though, is at the beginning of the dialogue, Euthyphro is very confident that what he's doing is right. He thinks that, yeah, he should bring charges against his father. He should testify against him in court. This is the right thing to do. And at one point, he claims to be acting on knowledge and guidance from the gods. He says, I know what piety is. I know what's right and wrong. That's why I'm confident, Socrates, that what I'm doing is right. Well, Socrates doesn't exactly believe him. And thus they begin their whole discussion about, well, yeah, what makes an action right or wrong in the first place? And how do you know? Now, one more note. This is important for understanding Socrates' actions and how he appears in these dialogues. One of the things that Socrates' opponents bring up in order to justify their charges of impiety against him is, well, Socrates claims to have a daimonion inside of him. He doesn't really explain what this is, but the way he describes it is, sometimes I will hear a voice inside of me that tells me not to do something. And I found out that when I listen to that voice, things go well for me in my life. The voice never tells him to proactively do anything. It just warns him against doing certain things, he says. Well, once other people hear Socrates saying things like this, they think, what? You claim to have like special guidance from the gods? The gods are speaking to you or something? You have a spirit inside of you that's directing your life? What a ridiculous thing to say. What kind of evidence do you have for that? Why should we trust you? Hence, charges of impiety. Another interesting thing, though, about this dialogue is Euthyphro, who claims to be this bastion of piety and to know what's right and wrong, thinks that Socrates himself is a wise and virtuous man. Socrates, who claims, well, really to not know much of anything, who is constantly putting himself down in the dialogues in an ironic way, and claiming to seek wisdom from those around him. So the whole discussion we're going to be looking at today is the conversation between these two characters. And it's all going to turn around these 2 points right here. Because I'm betting that y'all have views about what's right and wrong, right? Is murdering a baby for fun wrong? What do you think? Is torturing a bunny for fun wrong? We all have strong views about these things, right? We all think we know what's right and wrong. Well, let's get into that. Let's see what Socrates and Euthyphro say here. Let's see what this discussion, what this dialogue can avail us of. Okay. I'm going to present some of the pieces of the dialogue on screen, and I'd just like to read them through together with you. This will help provide us with context, and it'll help provide us with some guidance as we go through the different twists and turns of this conversation. Okay? So, could I get someone to read this paragraph here? This is near the beginning of the dialogue. Euthyphro is explaining what he's doing here, why he's run into Socrates. Otherwise, I'll just cold call on someone. Go for it.
It is ridiculous, Socrates, for you to think that it makes any difference whether the victim is a stranger or a relative. One should only watch whether the killer acted justly or not. If he acted justly, let him go. But if not, one should prosecute a status quo. The status is the killer shouldn't be hurt and the pollution is the same. If you knowingly keep company with such a man and do not cleanse yourself, and by bringing him to justice, the victim was dependent on mine. And when we are farming in Maxim,
Just steamroll ahead. Just keep going.
he was a servant of ours. He killed one of our household slaves in a drunken anger. So my father found him hand and foot and threw him in a ditch. Then he ran here to inquire from the priest what should be done. During that time he gave no thought or care to the bound man as being a killer, and it was no matter if he died, which he did. Hunger and cold and his bonds caused his death before the messenger came back from the seer. Both my father and my other relatives are angry that I am prosecuting my father for murder on behalf of a murderer when he hadn't even killed him. They say that even if he had, a dead man does not deserve a thought. He was a killer, for they say it is impious for a son to prosecute his own father for murder, but their ideas of the divine attitude, piety, and impiety are wrong, Socrates.
Good, thank you. Okay, so what do we get here? Well, they start to get into the discussion, Socrates and Euthyphro defends what he's doing. He says, I'm acting rightly here in bringing charges against my father. Because what did his father do? He killed someone. Can you provide more context? What's the story here?
He tied someone up and threw him into a ditch with no food or no warmth. And he sent someone to go ask a priest what should be done. And by the time he came back, he was dead from hunger or frostbite.
Yeah, exactly, right? His father bound up this guy who, was this a good guy? No, what did this guy do? He murdered someone, right? So his father bound up this guy who murdered someone, and he left him in a ditch to basically starve and die. He didn't get back to him before he croaked. Euthyphro thinks he's acting justly here in bringing charges against his father. What do y'all think?
I think it kind of follows the idea of like an eye for an eye.
Yeah? Is that good?
I don't know, it depends. Some say yes, some say no.
Well, what do you think?
Sometimes it's justified, yeah.
Let's say we have a guy.
Murder, yeah.
Let's say we have a guy who is a murder rapist. Okay? And he says he gets caught. He's raped and murdered people. And he says, yeah, I'm going to keep doing it. Would it be just to kill that person? The big question is, why? How? Can you justify that view? Well, as we're going to see, Socrates is going to challenge Euthyphro's views about, well, what makes an action right or wrong. And so he goes on to ask, Socrates does, okay, you say what you do is justified, Euthyphro. Explain to me then what you think piety is. What is your view on what's right and wrong? Well, what does he say? Can I get someone to be Euthyphro and I will be Socrates? Yeah.
Well then, what is dear to the gods is pious. What is impious?
Splendid, Euthyphro. You have now answered in the way I wanted. Whether your answer is true, I do not know yet, but you will obviously show me that what you say is true.
Certainly.
Come then, let us examine what we mean. An action or a man dear to the gods is pious, but an action or a man hated by the gods is impious. They are not the same, but quite opposite. The pious and the impious. Is that not so?
It is indeed.
And that seems to be a good statement.
I think so, Socrates.
We have also stated that the gods are in a state of discord, however. They don't always agree with each other. That they are at odds with each other, Euthyphro. And that they are at enmity with each other. Has that too been said?
It has.
It has, okay. So what's the first answer that Euthyphro provides? What makes an action right or wrong? Right at the top, what does it say?
Whether you are God or God.
Exactly. What is pious or good is what is dear to the gods. What do you think? Does this seem right?
No.
Why don't you think so?
Well, certain gods, and they offer up sacrifices, like human sacrifices to please them. Would that be good if we killed someone just to please another god?
What do you think?
I think it's not.
No. You think there's some standard of right and wrong, right? Perhaps that is independent of what the gods find pleasing or not. Perhaps. This is a fine first answer, right? It's not too bad. But what does Socrates say at the end here?
That the gods are against each other.
If you know anything about Greek mythology, you know that the gods often disagree about things. They have their own plans, they have their own desires. The way the Greeks conceptualized the gods was very anthropomorphic, okay? They saw them kind of as like immortal human beings. The gods have desires, they have wills, they have goals, they get angry, they get sad. This is a different kind of conception than the way we might think about God nowadays, right? Perhaps. But in any case, they believe in a bunch of different gods. And sometimes the gods fight and they disagree. So, what does he say? Well, Euthyphro, perhaps this answer isn't that great because the gods love different things. How do you explain that, right? What is good is what is loved by the gods. Okay, but what if the gods disagree? Which god are we supposed to listen to? You know, what actions are good then? Is it what Hades likes? Is it what Zeus likes? Is it what Hera likes or Aphrodite? The gods don't always agree. Does anybody know where Euthyphro goes from here? How he amends his first answer? Anybody remember from the reading? Well, how would you respond to what Socrates says? But the gods disagree.
I don't think it's the gods that decide. I think it's us humans.
You think we decide what's right and wrong? What if we disagree? We probably don't all have the same moral views in this room, right? Yeah?
Is it something that all the gods agree on?
Something all the gods agree on. That's a good response, right? Doesn't that make sense? Okay, so maybe they disagree about little things. But maybe what's ultimately right and wrong is what they all agree on, right? What they all love. How about that? Consequently, what is wrong or impious is what all the gods hate. Seems like a good first brush, right? But we've already kind of gotten an inkling about a problem with this view, right? For those of you who believe in God in this room, if God all of a sudden tomorrow said, murder is good, I want you to murder, would that make murder good? Why not?
Because we're stuck in our old ways.
We're stuck in our old ways, okay.
It's not your decision when the life ends.
Well, it's not ours, sure, but God says, murder's okay now. Get rid of that commandment about not murdering. It's good to murder now. I want you to murder. Do you think that would make it good?
How do we know if that command is directly from God?
That's a good question. What if God comes and personally speaks to you? And you know it's God. I mean, right there, Jesus shows up, you know?
Then the Bible says that that will happen as well, and it will not be God.
Oh, you might be deceived,
Yeah.
tricked or something by an evil spirit or something. Okay, sure, that might happen. What I'm trying to get at, though, is the source of what you think is right and wrong. Everybody here think rape is wrong? Torture, killing people for fun. Yeah, I think generally we all think that's wrong. Do you think what's right and wrong is independent of your personal views? Or are you the arbiter of what's right and wrong? Do you yourself determine what's right and wrong for all of humanity?
It's more social acceptance. If enough people believe it's right, then it's generally perceived as right.
It's perceived as right. Okay, but what do you ultimately believe? If people tomorrow all of a sudden started thinking, yeah, rape is okay, and the majority of society was like, totally fine, do you think they'd be right or wrong?
Think about it, because when you go back to Vikings, rape happened all the time. They didn't think it was a problem.
They didn't think it was a problem, sure, but was it right or wrong, what they did?
Depends on which viewpoint you're looking at.
Okay, so it's relative maybe. Relative to that society? Okay.
I agree with them because very close to where I live, there's an indigenous tribe that practices on a daily basis rape and murder. But to them, it's just like their routine. It's not even called rape and murder; it's just called some ritual practices. So
Sure.
parents will have children with their daughters who are 10 years old.
Oh.
And then,
When, what do you think about that?
well, I'd say it's wrong because I live in our society, but I mean, fundamentally, they don't even see it as something not even weird or anything.
Yeah. It's a normal occurrence for them, right? They don't see it as wrong.
They're cannibals as well, so they'll just eat the weakest of their members.
Let me bring up a shocking example, if I haven't already. Has anybody here heard of female genital mutilation? You know what that is? Some of you in this room? Well, it happens to different degrees, but it involves the genital mutilation of young girls. This is practiced in some cultures. They'll cut something off of them or out of them, or they will sew them up to prevent them from having premarital sex, things like this. Totally normal in their culture to do that. But does that make it right? Is female genital mutilation good in the places it's practiced? It's just relative to whatever they think. Or perhaps do many of you think, no, there is an objective standard of what's right and wrong, and it doesn't depend on any culture's views or opinions. Murder is always wrong. Rape is always wrong, everywhere at all times. Anyone find that kind of view intuitive? Yeah.
I think it also has to do with, like, if you're hurting the other person, like, they can say it's correct, but at the end of the day, is the little girl that they're talking to going through pain because they went through that?
Certainly they are. Yeah, depending on the degree of severity, yeah. What Socrates is after here, and what most people, I think, believe, is that there is an objective right and wrong at the end of the day. People might not accept that. People might say differently. But if I were to come into your house and kill your family and take your things and tell you, well, this is fine where I come from, you're not allowed to be angry, you're not allowed to judge me, wouldn't you find that ridiculous? A lot of people would. I'm not saying that's the right view or the wrong view, but a lot of people would find that silly. So Socrates and the other Greeks generally think, like, look, there's a right and a wrong way to behave. There are moral and immoral actions. And somehow, what makes an action right or wrong has something to do with the gods. What the gods believe or command or what they love. Something like this. So, after an objection, Euthyphro responds with this. Well, okay, what makes an action right or wrong is whether all the gods love it or all the gods hate it. Socrates, of course, is going to find a problem with this response as well. Okay, could I get another person to be Euthyphro? Great. What then do we say about the pious Euthyphro? Surely that it is being loved by all the gods according to what you say?
Yes.
Is it being loved because it is pious or for some other reason?
For no other reason.
It is being loved then because it is pious. But it is not pious because it is being loved?
Apparently.
And yet, it is something loved and loved by the gods because it is being loved by the gods.
Of course.
Then the God loved is not the same as the pious Euthyphro, nor the pious the same as the God loved as you say it is, but one differs from the other.
How so, Socrates?
Because we agree that the pious is being loved for this reason, that it is pious. But it is not pious because it is merely being loved. Is that not so?
Yes.
And that the God loved, on the other hand, is so because it is being loved by the gods, of the very fact of being loved. But it is not being loved because it is God loved.
True.
But if the God loved and the pious were the same, my dear Euthyphro, then if the pious was being loved because it was pious, the God loved would also be being loved because it was God loved. And if the God loved was God loved because it was being loved by the gods, then the pious would also be pious because it was being loved by the gods. But now you see they are opposite cases as being altogether different from each other. The one is such as to be loved because it is being loved. The other is being loved because it is such as to be loved. I'm afraid, Euthyphro, that when you are asked what piety is, you do not wish to make its nature clear to me. But you told me an affect or quality of it, that the pious has the quality of being loved by all the gods. But you have not yet told me what the pious is. Now, if you will, do not hide things from me, but tell me again from the beginning what piety is in itself. Whether being loved by the gods or having some other quality, we shall not quarrel about that. But be keen and tell me what the pious and the impious are.
Socrates, I have no way of telling you what I have in mind. For whatever proposition we put forward goes around and refuses to stay put where we established it.
Good. Thank you very much. So what does Socrates do here? Well, he draws a distinction between things being loved by the gods and the things that are actually good. Take other cultures' practices, for instance. There are practices that they love, but many of you would say, well, just because they're loved, that doesn't necessarily make them right. Right? A lot of people in our society, for instance, they love just doing a bunch of drugs and hooking up with people. Orgies all day, every day, let's say. Just because people love it, does that make it right or good? What do you think? I love drinking tea at night before bed. Does that make what I'm doing good?
It's not causing harm, is it?
I hope not. But your question is a good one, right? What did you ask? You said it's not causing harm. So whether or not somebody loves something doesn't determine whether it's right or wrong. On this view, it would be whether or not it's causing harm. Right. And Socrates is making that similar point. He says, look, you haven't really told me what makes something right or wrong. You've just told me a quality or a property of it. People like it. Well, that's not the same thing, right? First, he points out that it seems the gods love things because they're pious in themselves. The gods love good actions because the actions are good. And then he says, but when you told me what makes an action right or wrong is that it's loved by the gods, obviously you don't believe that. You think there's a distinction between what's actually right and what people like. So again, his second answer has failed here. And what does Euthyphro say? Socrates charges him yet again with, tell me what this is, man. What makes an action right or wrong? What does Euthyphro say? Yeah, he's like, I can't do it. I have no way of telling you what I have in mind. Whatever proposition I put forward goes around and refuses to stay put. You're finding problems with all my answers. It seems like this is a thornier topic than I thought. But Euthyphro doesn't exactly give up here. Okay? When someone contests your knowledge and your beliefs, you're going to argue for them, right? You're going to try to meet their objections. You're going to try to meet, well, the problems that they are raising for you. So Euthyphro tries, well, at least one more time to tell Socrates what he thinks piety is. What makes an action right or wrong? We have to skip ahead a little bit to find it. Okay. Could I get one more Euthyphro? This is the last thing you'll have to read for a while. Perfect. Go for it.
I told you a short while ago, Socrates, that it is a considerable task to acquire any precise knowledge of these things. But to put it simply, I say that if a man knows how to say and do what is pleasing to the gods at prayer and sacrifice, those are pious actions, such as preserve both private houses and public affairs of state. The opposite of these pleasing actions are impious and overturn and destroy everything.
Okay. You could tell me in far fewer words, if you were willing, the sum of what I asked Euthyphro, but you're not keen to teach me. That is clear. You were on the point of doing so, but then you turned away. If you had given that answer, I should now have acquired from you sufficient knowledge of the nature of piety. As it is, the lover of inquiry must follow his beloved wherever it may lead him. Once more then, what do you say that piety and the pious are? Are they a knowledge of how to sacrifice and pray?
They are.
So to sacrifice is to make a gift to the gods, whereas to pray is to beg from the gods?
Definitely, Socrates.
It would follow from this statement, then, that piety would be a knowledge of how to give to and beg from the gods.
You understood what I said very well, Socrates.
That is because I'm so desirous of your wisdom, and I concentrate my mind on it, so that no words of yours may fall to the ground. But tell me, what is this service to the gods? You say it is to beg from them and to give to them?
I do.
And to beg correctly would be to ask from them things that we need.
What else?
And to give correctly is to give them what they need from us. For it would not be skillful to bring gifts to anyone that are in no way needed.
True, Socrates.
Piety, then, would be a sort of trading skill between us and the gods.
Trading, yes, if you prefer to call it that.
Okay, let's just stop here for a moment. What's his third answer? What makes something pious? Yeah, and what were the two parts of that? Praying and sacrifice. Good. This is where he's locating piety, right? What is pious is what pleases the gods through prayer and sacrifice. Socrates, of course, is not finished asking the questions here. Euthyphro says, if you want to call it trading, sure. Then Socrates says, I prefer nothing unless it is true. But tell me, what benefit do the gods derive from the gifts they receive from us? What they give us is obvious to all. There is for us no good that we do not receive from them. But how are they benefited by what they receive from us? Or do we have such an advantage over them in the trade that we receive all our blessings from them and they receive nothing from us?
Do you suppose, Socrates, that the gods are benefited by what they receive from us?
What could those gifts from us to the gods be, Euthyphro?
What else do you think than honor, reverence, and what I mentioned just now to please them?
The pious is then, Euthyphro, pleasing to the gods, but not beneficial or dear to them?
I think it is of all things most dear to them.
So the pious is once again what is dear to the gods.
Most certainly.
When you say this, will you be surprised if your arguments seem to move about instead of staying put? And will you accuse me of being Daedalus who makes them move, though you are yourself much more skillful than Daedalus, and make them go round in a circle? Or do you not realize that our argument has moved around and come back again to the same place? You surely remember that earlier the pious and the God-loved were shown not to be the same, but different from each other. Or do you not remember?
I do.
Do you then not realize now that you are saying that what is dear to the gods is the pious? Is this not the same as the God-loved, or is it not?
It certainly is.
So then either we were wrong when we agreed before, or if we were right then, we are wrong now.
It seems to be so.
So, because our argument has come back full circle, and answer 3 has just led us back to answer 1, Socrates says, so we must investigate then from the beginning what piety is, as I shall not willingly give up before I learn this. Do not think me unworthy, but concentrate your attention and tell the truth. For you know it, if any man does, and I must not let you go, like Proteus, before you tell me. If you had no clear knowledge of piety and impiety, you would never have ventured to prosecute your old father for murder on behalf of a servant. For fear of the gods, you would have been afraid to take the risk, lest you should not be acting rightly, and would have been ashamed before men. But now I know well that you believe you have clear knowledge of what's right and wrong. So tell me, my good Euthyphro, and do not hide what you think it is.
Some other time, Socrates, for I am in a hurry now, and it is time for me to go.
And what does Euthyphro do? He runs away. He's tried to give 3 different answers to what piety is, what makes an action right or wrong. We had problems with the first one. We had problems with the second one. And we have problems with the third one as well. Why? Well, Socrates says, prayer and sacrifice, what's that about? And Euthyphro says, well, that's because it's pleasing to the gods. That's why we do it. We do it to please the gods. But of course, you see the problem with this response, right? This leads us right back to where we started. So Euthyphro gives up and he runs away. Socrates no longer has someone to talk to. He has not learned what's good or wrong here. Euthyphro claims what he's doing is right. He tries to justify his view to Socrates. But Socrates picks him apart question by question. And Euthyphro is probably left feeling, shit, maybe I don't know what this thing is. Is this not how people behave all the time? Raise your hand if you think you know what justice is. Would you be able to tell if an action is just, if you saw it or not? Is this just? I'm taking this now.
No.
Anybody else think it's just or no? Stealing someone's stuff? But if we got into it, and if we keep asking why and why, you too might discover, well, shoot, do I actually have a good understanding of the things I claim to? This is what happens in basically all of the Platonic dialogues. But the reason this one is important is because it has given us a question, a dilemma that theologians have been wrestling with for thousands of years. And it's aptly named the Euthyphro Dilemma, after, of course, it appearing in this dialogue. Can anybody restate it? We had it up on the board at the beginning. Yeah, go for it.
Is it something good because the gods love it, or is the gods love something because it's doing this?
Right. Is something, say an action, say charging your father for murder, is that a good thing because the gods love it? Or do the gods love it because it's already a good thing? What do you all think? How would you answer this question if it was put to you? Y'all understand what the question is asking? The question is, basically, do the gods determine what's right and wrong? Or do the gods, say, love what's right and wrong because they're right and wrong in themselves? Well, Euthyphro has tried to answer both ways. Once, another. But there are problems with both of these. When someone gives you a dilemma like this, they give you an either or. The two different ways you can answer are sometimes called the horns of the dilemma. Because no matter which way you answer, you have a problem. or something like a contradiction arises. So let's just talk through it. Well, what's the first way you could answer this? Well, you could say something like, it's not the gods loving a thing that makes it good. Things are just good in and of themselves. Like rape and torture are just bad in and of themselves, regardless of whether Zeus approves of it. You could argue that what is good, what is right, what is wrong is independent of how the gods feel. Does anybody notice a problem with this? Yeah.
That means like God doesn't choose what's good and wrong, like we kind of on our own.
God doesn't choose what's right and wrong then. Yeah, doesn't anybody here believe that God is the arbiter of what's right and wrong? But if you say this, well then you're implying, yeah, what's good is something independent of God. Doesn't have anything to do with God. But you might think, well, that's not right. It would seem, if I believe in God, that what's good or not is determined by God. So I can't answer this way. Well, as you said, this would imply that the gods are not sovereign like we think they are. They don't have mastery and control over everything. For some reason, there's this objective standard of right and wrong that they didn't create, that they didn't determine, that is separate from them. You might think, well, that raises an issue, right? They aren't sovereign, but they're beholden to this objective standard of right and wrong. So there's something over which they do not have power and control. But how do we think of God? God has all the power and control over everything, right? So this is a problem. What does this imply? Well, if there's this standard of right and wrong that exists independently of them, that they're beholden to, that they didn't create, that they didn't determine, that means they're not all powerful. God's not all powerful. This is an issue, right? Don't we think that God is all powerful? Don't we think that God is in control of everything and has power over everything and made everything? Well, if we say that what's right or wrong is independent of God's views about it, perhaps these consequences logically follow and we're forced to admit, oh, God isn't all powerful and in control of everything. So those are some issues with answering this question in that way. Okay, let's try the other way. Maybe that way is better. A lot of people certainly believe that, well, God determines what's right and wrong. What's right and wrong isn't dependent of God, but yeah, whatever God says is right and wrong. You see any issues with answering in this way? Yeah.
Kind of brought back to what you said, if God suddenly says murder is okay, is it now okay?
All right. If God comes to you tomorrow and says, actually, torturing babies for fun is good now. I want you to do that. Would that suddenly make it good? What do you think?
I was going to say something else.
Okay.
Previous question.
I'll go for it.
Yeah, so the issue with arguing what God loves and commands is that fundamentally, when you look at what most of like what the churches say, most of the religions say, is that God knows what's gonna happen like prior to it happening.
Mm-hmm.
They can like either allow or not allow it to happen, and that's like that doesn't just go with law and commands, because if he knew what's gonna happen and he doesn't love that, he allowed it for a greater cause, like murder, for example. He's justifying murder, right? So
Some people would argue that, right?
but then, like, it's a whole, like, because then murder, like, so there are cases that murder is justifiable, but then God versus law murder. When can you justify it and when can you not? That's the question.
That's a tough question, right? Yeah.
When he said it, I think that it also gets to the point that like a lot of the God things that God loves us and he gives us options to choose. So that to him it might be right or wrong, but he doesn't just tell you if it's right or wrong, he gives you the options. So you don't have to go with what he is telling you exactly, but because of his love, you have the choice to do what you think is also right.
We're not forced to behave one way or another, you're saying?
Yeah.
We have this thing called free will, and we can decide to live according to God's will or not. Yeah, a lot of people certainly believe that, yeah.
But also, this is also if God does exist. There's a possibility
Right.
he doesn't. Then, if that is the case, then how do we say what is right or wrong?
It's a great question. Is it determined, for example, by the consequences of your actions? Is that what makes an action right or wrong? Something like, are you increasing the suffering in the world, or are you increasing the happiness and well-being in the world through your actions?
Also, the idea of karma goes back to a religious idea, so in that case, it would still be tied to God. And if in that situation God doesn't exist, so would karma would exist?
These are very difficult questions. Yeah, what do we think makes an action right or wrong? Where do we get the source of our morality from? Well, the ancient Greeks thought it came from the gods. A lot of people in this room and in this country perhaps think it comes from the Christian God. But there's a problem with answering it in this way. That, let's say, it's Jesus who determines what's right and wrong. And it comes back to the question we've been circling around, which is, well, does that mean that what is right and wrong is just arbitrarily determined by God? What God likes that day or doesn't like that day? That doesn't seem right, but are we just all subject to God's caprice? We were given these commandments. We're told not to murder, not to engage in adultery, not to covet. But if God came to you tomorrow and said, today I feel like, murder's okay. I think a lot of people would say, well, no, that wouldn't make it okay. Murder is still wrong, even if God says it's okay. Perhaps. Another question you might ask is, okay, well, if what is right and wrong is determined by what God commands, does that mean God isn't acting on rational reasons? If what's right and wrong is just determined by what He's commanding, that have any basis? Or is it just whatever is right and wrong is what he commands? This doesn't seem right. Many of us would want to say, well, no, God has good reasons for commanding what he does. But then we might be led back to this. Oh, so God commands things because they're good, and what's good then is independent of God, so he's not all-powerful? Let me just get one more on the table. We're left in a pickle here. And this is a question, this dilemma, many religious-minded people have been debating about and wrestling with for a very long time. What do you got, Sage?
I'm just wondering that you asked like that as rational reasons. I'm just wondering, we don't necessarily know the reasoning, so how do we know if it's rational or irrational?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question to ask. We can't see inside the mind of God, perhaps. Who are we to judge whether or not God is being rational or good or bad? A lot of people respond in that way.
Are you talking about a god or the gods? Because on that board you were talking about the Greek gods as in the Greek gods, but on this, is there like a difference?
Not for the purpose of this dilemma. Yeah, it would apply to both.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a very difficult question to answer, right? I mean, it seems like we have a problem going either way.
One thing that I never understood, if our God is good, then why does he let bad things happen? If he knows that they're going to happen, why does he let them happen? And also, am I really going to go to heaven or hell if he already knows all the decisions I'm going to make? Do I really have a choice in what I'm going to do? It's all pre-decided by his idea or whoever's idea.
These are other thorny theological questions, right? Do you have a response to any of them?
No, but I was going to say, how do we know if there is a right or wrong? What if both options could be right? What if both options could be wrong? And in the end, if we choose one option, how can we know the outcome of the other option? You never really know what can happen from one thing.
Do you think actions are right or wrong?
I think it matters about the view from it and the perspective.
Okay, so if I walked in here today and I just came up behind you with a razor and I shaved your head and I ripped the clothes off your body, would that be right or wrong?
I mean, I would view that as wrong, but
I would also view it as wrong.
but it's like there's so many other things that could happen too, and you never know. Like, let's say like in a war or something, you're like a general and you're given like you could either do this or do this, and you do one thing, and 20% of your soldiers are gone, you lose the fight.
Sure.
A lot of people will say, well, he's a bad general, he chose the wrong option, but you'll never know if you chose the other option, what would happen. What if you chose the other option and you lose 50% of your soldiers? You never know the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like we can tell the future, right? And you might think, well, like, look, you might be asking yourself this whole time, I don't believe in God, so I don't think the source of morality comes from God. I think what's right and wrong is determined by something else. Well, one of the answers that we gave earlier, you could say is, well, again, whether an action is right or wrong is determined by the consequences. So when you have the general example, well, were the consequences better or worse as a result of his action? If they were worse than they would otherwise be, he did a wrong thing. But if it's better than it would otherwise be, then he did a good thing. This is one possible view. We'll summarize it, or we'll call it, for the purposes of today's discussion, utilitarianism, which is a brand of consequentialism. Maybe you think, no, what's right and wrong isn't determined by whatever God commands or feels. It's determined by the consequences of our actions. So, if you were planning a surprise party for your friend, somebody you just met the other day, you started to get close, and you're trying to throw a great party for them, you keep it secret, but then they show up and surprise, and they have a terrible panic attack and they need to be taken to the hospital. On this view, you've done a bad thing. Your intentions may have been good, but your actions resulted in worse consequences. So you've done a bad thing. Did your actions make the world a better place, or didn't they? Well, locating the rightness and wrongness of actions and consequences, that's a view that a lot of people have. Right? We're going to take a break here, though, because I know we have a lot of great stuff to talk about, but I've gone on for a little long. But while you're out on break, think about this. If we answer the dilemma either way, and it leads us into issues, how should we respond to it then? What are we supposed to say to a dilemma like this? Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes. We'll go to 125.